Hey now, hello and welcome to today's webinar, How to Move Your Events Online with Splash. I'm your co-host, Zach Napolitano, Splash's Director of Education, and joining me today is our very own technical expert and solutions consultant, Faisal Mawani. Faisal, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Zach. Thanks for asking. Happy to be with you here virtually today.
Glad you're here too, my man. Now, Faisal, for unfortunate reasons, the events landscape has changed quickly and dramatically. Over the years, you and I have worked with a lot of customers on webinars and virtual events, but rarely was that their primary use case. Because of COVID-19, that's changed pretty much overnight.
Yeah, Zach, if I could take at least one positive away from all this, it's the resilience and agility of our event marketing community. It's mind-blowing how quickly they've pivoted to virtual, and the experiences they've created have been pretty amazing along the way.
Well said, Faisal. And we'll talk more about the best practices we're seeing from those users in just a bit. Before we get rolling, I want to make sure our audience knows how to get their hands on some great resources after the webinar. The first resource is our education homepage found at splashthat.com/education. Visit us here to register for our weekly live trainings and to enroll in our free online courses. Speaking of courses, if you do complete one, we want to hear about it. Send us a picture of yourself with your certificate, and we will send you a Starbucks gift card. How about that? Next up, the Splash virtual homepage. You can see the URL right on your screen. This is where you could read more about our full virtual solution and learn more about the products and functionality we're going to be covering today. Okay, housekeeping complete. That was actually pretty efficient. Let's get into the good stuff. Faisal, 90% of the time in the past, we've spent helping clients. It's usually about live events, right? That stat has suddenly been flipped on its head. So our focuses today are virtual events and hybrid events. So I'm going to ask you to help us define the differences. Let's start with live events.
Sure, Zach. So as you mentioned, a live event is typically what most of us think of, right? It's a gathering of people in a physical space. It's what comes to mind when we hear the terms launch party or dinner, conference, happy hour, etc.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. And again, that was the world before COVID, right? What we're seeing a lot of now, hybrid events. What are these?
Yeah, so a hybrid event is one with both a live component and a virtual audience. So while there may be a physical audience present, people attending virtually are able to experience all of the event's programming and often can fully participate.
Yeah, well said. And the classic example of this is a viewing party. But a use case that's huge for a lot of companies, including our own here at Splash, is an all hands meeting or a town call. So for us, we do the main broadcast at our New York City headquarters in front of a live audience. Satellite offices join in through our stream. They could ask questions, and our execs and directors even deliver full presentations. It's great. Third type, virtual event.
Virtual events. So I'm sure most of you can see where we're going here, but this is exclusively an online gathering like our webinar today, but also includes anything in the realm of live streams or webcasts.
Yeah. So today's lesson is a very timely one, how to move your events online. So we'll be discussing three main topics: hybrid events, webinars, and then webinar integrations, specifically the tactics the most agile event marketers are using today to pivot and scale their virtual programs. Speaking of scale, Faisal, what webinar integrations are we talking about?
Yeah, so we got three big ones to go through today. First up will be our native integration with Blue Jeans. From there, we'll take a look at the Splash on 24 integration powered via Marketo. And then lastly, we'll look at the Zoom integration powered via Zapier.
Yeah, the one thing I do want to call out is that while integrations offer the highest ceilings in terms of automation and data flow, they are not required to start hosting online events with Splash. So it's an important call out. If you're a customer, you do not need to relearn Splash to start marketing your virtual events. You do not need to integrate on day one. In fact, what I'm most excited about in terms of today's webinar, and this was supposed to be a surprise, but I can't contain myself. We have new event themes that are going to make marketing a virtual event unbelievably easy and, dare I say, kind of fun. But we'll get to that in a bit. Let's start by talking about hybrid events, and then we'll proceed on to webinars and our webinar integrations. So again, hybrid events allow guests to participate in person or virtually. So the first piece of Splash functionality that I want to talk about for best practices is the use of conditional logic to create smart registration forms. This is going to allow you to collect RSVPs for your in-person versus virtual audience so you can plan accordingly. It's also going to allow you to ask the right guests the right types of questions, right? If someone is attending virtually, we don't want to ask them about their dietary restrictions. We don't want to ask them if they're going to be coming to the happy hour. A lot of times we think about FOMO and wanting to create it for our events. In this new world, we're trying to steer away from FOMO and be ultra inclusive. So speaking of which, after you collect that information, this is going to allow you to tailor your message using the Splash guest list, custom lists, and our email sending tool. You will be able to send different email follow-ups and even thank yous and reminders to your virtual audiences versus your live audiences. Helps you keep that content nice and relevant. The next thing I want to call out is the importance of giving your guests options, especially if things are a bit dicey in terms of health concerns, right? We have the ability in any email that we send from Splash to give guests the ability to change their response, right? So if they're on the fence and they want to change from in-person to virtual, call that out, make it an option and celebrate that option. And pretty cool thing here, new functionality or pretty new functionality in Splash, we actually allow the main guests to modify their responses for their plus ones too now. Again, flexibility, the name of the game. Be prepared to pivot. A really useful feature, and one I'm using on my webinar page, my wedding page powered by Splash, is what's called a welcome modal, right? If guests are going to be repeatedly coming to your page to look for updates, you can greet them with what's called a welcome modal, and this enables that messaging to be front and center upon page load. Somewhat of a new feature, but an absolute game changer for keeping guests in the loop. Make your live stream a destination. So with Splash, it is incredibly easy to embed media, live streaming media like Facebook Live, YouTube Live, LinkedIn Live directly onto your page. So direct your traffic to your embedded feed. We're going to show you how to do that today. And then you could also surround that feed with lots of relevant content. So you have the stream up top, you might have your speakers below, you might have some cool other additional embeds like chat widgets below, you might have resources below. Really make it a destination. And again, I'll show you that in just a bit. And speaking of which, customer of ours, Patreon, did a tremendous job doing this, embedding their YouTube live feed right onto a Splash page for their weird streamathon, multi-hour event. It was pretty fantastic, and one of the finer use cases I've seen in recent months. With virtual events, I always stress post-event, and I do this for live events too, but it's even bigger for post-event. So in your thank you emails or the sorry you missed it emails, get those out hopefully 24 hours after the event or sooner. Make all of your video content viewable on demand, and all the resources that may have been presented in terms of slides or white papers, make those available for download. All this content is super easy to embed into your Splash page. Okay, now we're going to shift gears slightly into webinars. So going from a hybrid event to a full virtual presentation, a webinar. And what I would say here is Splash makes webinars easy, but they require the same rigor and creativity as your live events. So what that means is you can make the experience really compelling, but you also want to be really on top of everything the same way you would with a live event in terms of the way you're communicating details and the rigor you're putting into your email cadence. First thing to point out, location is everything. So with a webinar, your venue is no longer a physical location, it's the URL that your guests are going to be joining. So put this into your location information in Splash. In this case, it's a Zoom link. And this will make sure that's showing up in your calendar invites and confirmation emails. Absolutely paramount. And here's a little pro tip from me, which I'm planning to show you later. Pop your full meeting information into your calendar attachment description in Splash, and you can see how beautifully of a calendar invite that creates. This might sound silly, but in terms of functionality that has been getting our customers really excited, this one ranks pretty high on the list and ends up being one of the simpler ones. Next pro tip, over communicate your logistics. So in some examples, you may not be distributing your webinar URL into the day of the event. It may be a unique webinar URL per participant, and we're going to talk about that. If that's the case, no problem, but quell any anxiety about that webinar link early and often, right? Get it into your on-page confirmation, get it into your email confirmation, and communicate that logistical information in all of your follow-ups. Speaking of follow-ups, here's a gorgeous one I received recently from webinar platform On24. Double down on that reminder sequence. Schedule out your emails in advance for your day of and your hour before, so everyone knows exactly how to join. Use really strong calls to action in your subject line and in the actual button elements in your emails. And all emails should contain instructions for joining. And once again, with your webinars, post-event is king, right? So something that we've learned, especially doing a lot of webinars recently, is our on-demand content often performs similarly or exceeds the live broadcast. There's a pretty heavy demand for it, right? Because people are used to dialing stuff up on Netflix whenever they want. Same thing with your webinars. So make a compelling post-event experience. First and foremost, embed that recording right on top of the page. I'll show you that in our demo in just a bit. And if you're using webinars as a way of capturing leads for demand gen, lead gen, right? You can gate the content. So what this means is post-event, direct to a site with your classic Splash registration form, so you're capturing that data, and then upon submission, redirect to your actually embedded content. So this is going to allow you to not miss out on a single lead and know exactly who's viewing all of your webinar content the same way you would for a live broadcast. Okay, one of my favorite Splash features, great for live events, but even more important for webinars, in my humble opinion, Splash's hub technology. This allows you to make lots of events discoverable onto a single landing page. So in the case of your hybrid events or webinars, it's where guests can find the upcoming ones and where you can make your on-demand content available. Now, check out that last little bullet point. I'm really excited to share this with you today. All Splash customers have 3 hub templates in their theme library. So if you haven't seen this, create a new event, select hub as your event type, and you will be greeted by something pretty great. 3 hub themes that are going to make creating a hub incredibly easy. How about that? That's right. You get a hub, you get a hub, and you get a hub. Okay, a few more before we get into our demo. Surveys, post-event surveys. So these are great for any event that you do, but specifically and especially your webinars. Because why? Well, webinars may be a new frontier for you, and you want to learn what you're doing well or what you can improve on. Also, your speakers are going to typically want to get feedback. So this is a great way to capture feedback for them. You do not need to use Splash for your surveys. You could redirect from your thank you emails to any survey functionality. The benefit of using Splash, though, is you can make those surveys be meticulously branded and awesome. So I do recommend that. And for those requesting it, this is how Splash This is Splash's webinar journey here from a guest experience. You can see on the left, we start with the gated content, whether that's for registration for the main event or even post-event. For the live experience, we're redirecting to the On24 console typically. For the post-event, we're redirecting to our embedded media that we are usually hosting on YouTube or Vimeo. Pretty straightforward. Okay, final tip, develop a repeatable process. So many of our customers are using Splash because they're running scaled programs, right? They're not using us to run a single gigantic event. They're using us to run every event in their organization. And what they do so well is templatize everything. The event page, the email sequence, the copy, everything, right? Post-event. So as you start developing these best practices in Splash, for your virtual events, do the same thing. Templatize it, make it repeatable and easy by leveraging Splash themes. And here's what I was excited to tell you about today. Use Splash's new webinar branded theme and soon themes. That's right. So we have, and I'm going to show you this in our demonstration now, a new webinar theme that is going to make all the things I showed you, embedding content, sending emails, live streaming, really easy. It's a playbook within a theme. So what I'm going to do now is stop my screen share and get into that demonstration. Okay, I'm in Splash, and what I'm going to do is initiate the process as I always would with the new event button. And we're going to enter our details. So we'll just call this Tools to Be Great Webinar 2020. And here's the key. We're going to select our event type as webinar. We are going to hold tight on our venue. We'll talk about that in a bit. And now we're going to hit choose theme and come over to our branded theme library. And you can see by virtue of selecting webinar, I have Splash's brand new webinar branded theme, which is amazing for both virtual and hybrid events of all kinds. So I'm going to select this one. And worth noting as this is creating, we are developing even more webinar branded themes. So you have more options to choose from. Okay, page is being created. I'm actually going to launch myself right into the event page touch point here to give you a feel for what we're working with. And some beautiful onboarding here with a tutorial video on the best practices for using this theme. But I guess I'll handle that since I'm hosting. So as we scroll down, you may say, hey, Zach, this looks like a regular Splash theme. It's absolutely gorgeous. What's different about it? Well, first thing I'll say is from a webinar registration perspective, it is loaded with the takeaways as a repeatable element, which is great. And it's really got great emphasis on our speakers. So much requested feature is to have our speaker information in a modal. There it is, and it makes it really easy. To the right, you'll also see that we have a hidden multi-host block. We're running a multi-host event right now with me and Faisal. So if you have a bunch of hosts, same functionality with a slightly different layout. You'll also see hidden to the right that we have a hidden agenda block. So if you want to really give somebody, meaning your audience, a really detailed layout of what to expect, that block will be quite useful. Now, here's where we really get into how this gets super easy for virtual events. Check out some of these other hidden blocks to the right. So in the example that I might be embedding a live stream on my page, what I would do is something like this. I would hide my cover block for registration, and I would reveal my YouTube or Vimeo block right here and drag that to the top of my page. Here's a little tutorial, which I'll hide. That's just for best practices. And now you can see in a matter of seconds, I've transformed my page into a destination for my live streaming content, right? So to show you how easy this is to use, I will come to YouTube Live, just grab my YouTube link here. replace my URL like so, hit save, and now we have an actual live stream happening on our page. It's that easy. Okay. What I would do next for post event is, again, hide this content. And then I would take a look at my post event content here, right? I have a post event cover block, which is going to link us down to our on-demand video block, which I'll reveal here. I will drop that down below the cover block. And now what I'll do, instead of showing my live feed, is I will grab a on-demand recording that I've uploaded to YouTube. Just grab that URL, replace that in here, and hit save. And to double down on this, we also have this incredible resources block down below, which I will also drag up below my video. And this is going to make presenting all your downloadable resources and URLs super easy for post-event. Incredibly easy. That's the point. Those hidden blocks are going to be your best friend. Couple things I want to show you before I hand it off to Faisal for webinar integrations. The email sequence. So the webinar branded theme also comes loaded with your full email sequence for nurturing your guests through reminders, day of reminder, and thank you. So take a look at these templates here. Morning of, the 1 hour. You can see these have strong calls to action. Really, really great subject lines. All the copy is there for you to play with. And take a look at our post event, right? Post event template is going to allow me to post my on-demand content with a really strong call to action. It's also going to link out to my survey, which I'm incentivizing with the Starbucks gift card. And I'm also directing to my webinar hub with my third call to action. So all of these email templates are super dialed in for day of webinars and also day after for post event. So my best practice, I go to recipients, and I'll probably schedule these emails to go out ahead of time to my various guest list segments. So you can see here, I'm scheduling my post-event email to my checked-in list. And I would schedule the day after the event. Okay, and last thing, my event settings. So you could see here, that's that example I showed earlier, popping my Zoom URL into my location. And then to double down and really make it effective, I'm going into my site metadata and popping the whole meeting information into my calendar attachment description right there. All right, Faisal, I will stop sharing my screen and we'll get into webinar integrations.
Awesome, Zach. I think that was some great content, but I think it's now time to jump into some of the more fun stuff.
How dare you? I agree. This is where it gets really interesting, and I'm glad you're here to teach about it. So again, the 3 integrations we're covering today, Faisal, what are they?
Yep, so we'll start off with the native BlueJeans integration. From there, we'll take a look at the On24 integration powered via Marketo, and then we'll finish up with our Zoom integration powered via Zapier.
Beautiful. Yeah, so let's start with BlueJeans.
Perfect. So we have a little flow map here. What we'll do is we'll go through the overall flow of the integration, and then we'll actually jump into the back end. I'll show you how to build that integration, and then we'll test it out together live here. So starting on our left side, really your process starts in Splash now, and that's going to stay true for all of the integrations we talk about today. As you create that specific webinar event in Splash, and remember, as Zach showed, we want to trigger it tied to that webinar event type. Our BlueJeans integration will automatically create a BlueJeans event. One thing to note there is that we specifically integrate with BlueJeans events, not BlueJeans meetings. As you get that created and get all that data mapped over, and you start to promote your Splash webinar page and start to collect RSVPs, in real time, all of those RSVPs will get triggered and sent over to BlueJeans. On the BlueJeans side, the participant list really only requires emails, so there's no really mapping exercise there. We simply take all the emails and map them over. From there, the confirmation email is triggered out of BlueJeans. It has all of the data you need to join the webinar, call in, dial in information, all of that. Fast forward a little bit, and now let's say you're hosting your webinar. The integration in real time will change everyone's Splash status to checked in as they join the webinar. So call it, I don't know, the first 15 minutes of the webinar as people start to trickle in, those statuses will get flipped along with a timestamp. So you can see exactly when all of your attendees actually joined. And then not pictured on this flow map, but also optional in the integration is checkout timestamp. So if you really wanted to know how long are attendees staying in your webinar, what's the drop-off point, you could opt to sync over checkout data as well. And that'll just, once again, change the status to checked out with a timestamp once an attendee actually leaves the webinar. So it's just some added data for you to work with if you're curious about that kind of information.
Faisal, I love that. And the big thing I'll call out here is that check-in is so critical, right? Having a record of who showed up on the webinar and being able to automate that. The beautiful thing is when that check-in occurs, if your Splash is connected to your Salesforce or your Marketo or Eloqua, your HubSpot, that checked-in status is going to sync back to those systems of record automatically too. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, so crucial.
Okay, let's take a look under the hood.
Awesome. So I'm going to take over the screen share here, and then, like I mentioned, we'll take a look at the configuration, and then we'll look at the full integration demo live. Alrighty. So our process, what we're looking at now, just the Splash dashboard. Like I mentioned, we'll take a look at the back end of the integration, what it really takes to set it up, and then we'll take a look at the demo. So here you see I have my BlueJeans integration. Up top, authentication. As an admin in the BlueJeans portal, you can easily generate this client ID and secret and just copy paste it over into Splash. Down here, you're simply giving your integration a name, something unique that only lives within Splash. And then here we have our two actions. So the initial action, create event, which is telling us when should we create the event in BlueJeans. And I'm saying I want to create the event based on Splash event creation. And if there's any updates to my Splash event, I want those to sync over as well. So if I launch this event and then I decide, hey, I actually need to adjust the date and time, I can do that in one place and not worry about having to manually update that in BlueJeans. The next piece is inviting guests. So the only option we give you here is to invite guests to this webinar based on when they registered. And then I think one of the big configuration triggers here that I want to call out is a specific trigger condition. So for webinars specifically, and for this BlueJeans integration, you only might want it to fire when you are creating a certain type of event, right? A virtual event, a webinar event, whatever that might be. When we fast forward a little bit and things start to calm down and we start having in-person events again, we're not going to want to create a BlueJeans webinar for every happy hour we have. So we give you the ability to say, hey, take a look at these specific event types, which you can fully upload and brand through your implementation or customer success manager, and only fire this integration when the type of event is an FM testing event in this case. And then lastly, down here, two of our big features that we had mentioned. So do you want to sync the check-ins from BlueJeans back to Splash? I would be very surprised if anyone had this unchecked. It is a big value add of the integration, and we make it that simple, a simple checkbox. But we also have an added feature here. Do you want to sync checkouts from BlueJeans to Splash? So the use case here is, do you really want to measure how long people are staying in your webinar, or at what point is the bulk of your attendees dropping off of the webinar, and get that more of that insight of kind of average time spent, et cetera. So you're highly encouraged to use it, but you don't have to. So from here, we've seen our integration setup. It's pretty simple, especially compared to some of our other integrations that you might all be familiar with. Zach, I know we were talking about it. You don't even really need me to set this up. It's that simple. You could do this on your own. So let's go back to our events dashboard and let's go ahead and create an event here. So here's our standard create flow. Again, you just recently saw this. Let's host a webinar, maybe measuring, I cannot spell right, ROI on virtual events, something that we are all have top of mind right now. Again, for my integration, I have to click the FM testing event for that to trigger. We'll leave our location as TBD. And then here's the date and time. So a big call out here. I'm gonna set this webinar for tomorrow, just so it's easy to find in our BlueJeans platform. But a call out here. You in Splash have the ability to leave a event set as TBD. BlueJeans requires a start date and end time. So if you do not put a start date and time, you will have an error. If you forget to put an end time, it will default to a 2-hour webinar. You can always adjust that in the event settings of Splash or in BlueJeans, but just a good tool to know. So I'm gonna say we're having this webinar at the same time tomorrow. I just have to choose a theme here. Zach went through and showed us the webinar theme. I would probably use that in this instance, but for the sake of this demo, that doesn't really matter too much. And now that we have this page, there's two things we're gonna look at. That in the background created an event in BlueJeans. So let's take a look at that really quickly. If I come over to our BlueJeans platform, and just a note, I am in our events tab. We specifically integrate with BlueJeans events. If I give this a quick little refresh here, we should see our new webinar right up top. So upcoming events, I set it for tomorrow, like we mentioned, just so it would be easy to find, measuring ROI on virtual events. And one thing you'll notice here, I have 0 attendees for this event currently. Nobody has RSVP'd, nobody has been added manually. So let's go through that process real quick. So very simple RSV. Of course, you can capture any information you want on this form. Just note that email is currently the only field that BlueJeans accepts. And if I come back to our event here, give ourselves another quick refresh. We now see that we have 1 attendee. If I open up that attendee list, it is the email that I just used to RSVP. Pretty seamless integration. As you guys can all see, it is in real time. The last piece I want to show here before I go back to the deck is just some of the confirmation messaging I got. So right here, to that email that I just registered with, right? I got a confirmation email from BlueJeans. Hey, thanks for attending. Here's the information. Here's my unique link to join my webinar. And here's my calendar file, so I can get it on my calendar. I won't forget about it. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. But this is something we definitely want you to leverage, making it so easy to get this confirmation into somebody's inbox with all the correct information that they need. So I hope you guys thought that was really interesting. I'm even having fun demoing it. But I'm going to go back to the deck here. Awesome. So we took a look at our kind of the full BlueJeans integration there. The only thing we didn't take a look at was actually hosting the webinar and looking at that check-in data, but you could trust that that is in real time as well. So Zach, you wanna take a stab at recapping everything we just took a look at?
Yeah, let's talk about all the parts of the integration that are automated, which I think is the most exciting part. So an event created in Splash will automatically create the webinar in BlueJeans. All Splash registrants will automatically sync to the BlueJeans event list. Confirmation email is auto-triggered from BlueJeans with the webinar URL to the participants. And we also found out that the moderator receives a automatic email as well. And here's the big one. When an attendee joins the webinar, they're automatically checked into Splash, and that information will trickle down into all your other systems of record.
Yeah, that's great and exactly accurate. I think Just the point to stress here is that this is all, every one of those automation pieces are all happening in real time. So there's no real lag you have to worry about when somebody RSVPs to your event versus the time it takes to get that Blue Jeans confirmation, or vice versa. If you wanted to do post-event follow-up immediately after, we give you the ability to do that without having to wait a day or so.
Yeah, and I suppose the one other thing we should call out, and this will be the case for the other two integrations we talk about today, you set this up once and every event automatically benefits from this. You are not setting this up for every webinar that you do. Set it once, forget it.
Yeah, exactly accurate. And I think the big takeaway there is those authentication details that we talked about that you may need to activate your IT team for, that is a one-time activation, right? Like Zach mentioned, you just set that up once and you never have to worry about it again.
Cool. So let's talk about our next one is Splash to On24 via the On24 Marketo connector.
Yeah, so this is a big one. Obviously, On24 is a big player in the webinar department, and that's actually, this is the integration that we use at Splash for all of our webinars. So before I get into that, if you go back one slide for me, Zach, I'll give a quick overview of just our Marketo integration if you're not familiar. I won't go too in depth because I could spend pretty much the rest of the time just talking about Marketo, but high level, it is a bi-directional integration between Splash and Marketo. As you create events in Splash, we have the ability to create specific programs based on templates in Marketo. And then as attendees start RSVPing to those events, all of that data feeds into the Marketo program member list and vice versa. If you make any changes on the Marketo program member list side, or if you add any new attendees, that will then sync down to Splash as well. So just keep this high level Marketo integration in the back of your head, and we'll kind of touch on it as we go through this full flow.
Beautiful. Okay, let's start talking about that flow.
Awesome. So again, like we said, all of these integrations, your process really starts in Splash. So you create that specific webinar event in Splash. Based on the event type you use, we clone your webinar style program template in Marketo. That includes any smart campaigns, any flow steps that you've already set up, as well as any tokens that you need to map over as part of that program. So that's all done automatically. From there, your next step is really to go into On24, create the event manually. Has a few fields you need to fill out, such as event title, date and time, all of that. And then you simply need to link that to your Marketo program. So that is a manual step, but if any of you have done it before, it probably only takes a minute or two max. It's essentially copy pasting in the event ID from On24 into the Marketo event program settings. And then fast forward a little bit, as you start promoting your Splash page, you start collecting registration data. All of that data is then sent to Marketo, which then gets sent to On24. One key factor here is the confirmation email. Most of our clients leveraging this flow like to send that confirmation email with the unique participant link as a token out of Marketo. I've heard a few people prefer to send that out of On24. So that part of the flow is kind of up to you, but really it doesn't matter where that email comes from as long as the registrant is getting that confirmation email. But for Splash's use case specifically, all the confirmation emails you guys got for this webinar did come from Marketo using that unique pro participant webinar link as a token.
Yeah, so let's take a closer look real quickly at the config, and that first step happens in Splash. And Faisal, this is auto cloning the webinar program upon event creation, right?
Exactly. So that trigger condition up top, again, that is really crucial for the Marketo integration. We want to make sure we're cloning the right program based on the right event type. And then down here at the bottom, you see that program cloning section. We really surface all the details of that program to you, really making 110% sure that you are cloning the right program as part of this integration config. Again, I know Zach mentioned it. This is, again, a set it and forget it integration, right? Set this up one time, forget about it until you need to come back and potentially change that webinar program or your whatever program you're using.
Yeah, and the thing I like to emphasize about this is this little animation right here. This is a big deal. When you create that event in Splash, it's cloning the program in Marketo for webinars, which has all that automation for your email cadence and whatever other smart campaigns you have going on automatically programmed in.
Yeah, and Zach, that's really a crucial step because of that automation, but because it also minimizes the room for user error, right? If you had to manually create that program in Marketo, you could potentially mismatch the dates, potentially mistype something, but with that automated integration, you really don't have to worry about that at all. So step 2, like we looked at in our flow, was creating the webinar in On24. This is kind of the create flow for On24. But like we mentioned, what's the real specific step here is just copying that event ID as you create. In our next step, we'll see where that gets used.
Yeah, it's right here, Faisal, step 3.
Exactly. So here's a kind of a 3-prong workflow, I guess, if you will. But since you've already created this program automatically, it's just a matter of going into your event settings, selecting your event partner, in this case, On24, and copy pasting in that event ID like you see in that third screenshot, and making sure you save, obviously.
Step 4 is where the registration and program magic starts happening. Most notably is serving guests their unique webinar URL in your emails and also popping in all of the webinar specific information like the date, time, and location. How does that happen, Faisal?
Exactly. And yeah, before I even answer that question, you guys on this call, you might find one of these confirmation emails looking very familiar. Like I mentioned, this is the exact flow we use. So the way it works, as RSVPs are collected on the Splash side in real time or upon the batch sync, they are sent over to Marketo, added to the Marketo program member list. From there, based on your On24 and Marketo connector, there is a flow step. As these registrations come in and that step changes to registered, it will trigger out the email using that unique participant link as a token that you set up. So this is something that you would also set up once on the Marketo side with On24. Again, a fairly straightforward integration. So really, there's as a program manager, there's not too much you have to worry about here. That base program essentially automates all of this, including the email send based on registration statuses in the Marketo program member list.
Okay, step 5, and this is another one that gets me really excited.
Yeah, so the single source of truth, right? Arguably one of the most important parts of this integration is who actually showed up to my webinar, because I want to follow up with them accordingly. As we heard in Zach's presentation earlier, post-event content is king, and following up post-event is a crucial factor here. But not only do we want to give you the ability to easily and quickly follow up with whoever showed up to this webinar, but those no-shows are just as important, right? They registered, they were interested, but for whatever reason, they were not able to attend the webinar. That is a prime demographic for your on-demand content, potentially pitched in a slightly different way than anyone who showed up to the event or the webinar, but really surfacing that information, not only in Marketo in the program member list, but by way of our bi-directional integration in Splash as well. So now you have a lot of options, right? Do you want to send that post-event follow-up from Marketo? Do you want to send it from Splash? Do you just want to report on it maybe from Splash? We give you all of that flexibility by way of this Marketo integration.
Yeah, you got to be agile. And if it's okay with you, Faisal, I'll take a crack at summing all this up for us and with the most salient points for this connector. So what I like most about it is because we're leveraging the automation power of Marketo, specifically programs, we're able to build a repeatable and automated process for our email communication and data flow. I love that we're able to distribute unique webinar URLs to each person because it enables that last one, which is auto syncing check-ins when someone joins the webinar back to the Marketo program and back to Splash.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of tie it all together, Zach, especially with that unique webinar link, we're really trying to make it as easy as possible for the attendee, right? We don't want them to come to On24 and fill out a form again, detailing who they are with their first name, last name, email, so we can make that link. So keep that top of mind too. This is really streamlining the attendee journey as well.
Love that. Okay. So next one we're going to talk about is Splash's connector to Zoom through Zapier. And this is a big one because we know Zoom is among the most popular platforms out there. Quick call out from my side, Faisal, is while this Zapier connector that we're going to discuss allows us to connect Splash to Zoom, it would also allow one to connect to On24, GoToWebinar, or other platforms out there. That's kind of the beauty of Zapier.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe before we leave this slide, to give everyone on the call an idea, if you're not too familiar with Zapier or Zapier, I know there's a little bit of a pronunciation
Guilty.
Choice there, but Zapier is an integration platform as a service. So think if this, then that software. It connects you with thousands of different apps, Splash being one of those apps, and in this case, Zoom being the other app that we're talking about. So if you create an event in Splash, then do this in a third-party system. In this case, then create a webinar in Zoom. Or if you collect a registration in Splash, then send that registration details to Zoom. So that's just an easy way to think about Zapier. But I encourage you guys to all take a look at their website. If you have a webinar platform that we're not specifically talking about, take a look. Maybe it's on Zapier. Maybe it'll be easy to build this integration for that platform.
Beautiful. Okay, let's talk about the two flows we need to set up with Zapier and Zoom.
Yep. So this really requires two integrations. That might sound a little daunting, but they're fairly simple. In Zapier terminology, that would be two different zaps. So looking on the right side of our slide here at the top flow, again, like we mentioned, your flow starting in Splash, creating that specific webinar event. All of those webinar details get sent to Zapier, reformatted, and then sent to Zoom to create the corresponding webinar. Should be noted that Zoom via Zapier can also create meetings, but in this case, we are focusing on the webinar workflow. The second piece here is the registration flow. So as you collect RSVPs on that Splash page, in real time, each time an attendee RSVPs, their details get sent to Zapier. In this use case specifically, we're only going to be sending first name, last name, and email. From there, everything gets reformatted, sent to Zoom, and added as an attendee. And then Zoom actually triggers out the auto confirmation email with all of the join data from Zoom. So that is a optional step. I've opted to show that and to include that in our flow. But if you prefer to disable that sending from Zoom, that is easily possible via the Zap that you create.
Love those options. So let's dive into the config. And I believe this starts with the Zoom webinar creation step initiated in Zapier.
Exactly. So in Zapier, you are going to use what is called their webhook app. And within the webhook app, it gives you the option to do a couple of things. In this case, we want to catch a hook specifically. So what that means is every time Splash does something, we send it to Zapier, and Zapier just catches that information and reformats it. So the big step here when you create that first webhook app is grabbing that custom webhook URL. That's what's going to be crucial to this entire setup, and that's what we will be using in step 2 just now.
Beautiful. And from there, what happens next?
Yep, so from there, you'll kind of come back to Splash and set up an HTTP post-back integration. That is what's going to alert Zapier every time an event is created and tell Zapier what to do.
Cool. So here's a closer look at that. And I believe what you're doing here in the beginning part, Faisal, is copying that webhook from Zapier in step 1 and just putting it into the integration in Splash.
Exactly.
Cool.
The second big component of this integration is the trigger and action. So what you're seeing there in the bottom right, we want to make sure we're only triggering this first integration for every time an event is created. And the one thing that just is not pictured in this screenshot, but that we've seen quite a bit already, is those trigger conditions. So this shouldn't fire for every event you create in Splash. It should only fire for specific webinar style events.
Got it. Cool. So then once the webinar is actually created in Splash, Splash will tell Zapier which webinar details are important. And there's three big ones, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is on that same integration that we were just looking at a minute ago here. So if I scroll down, you get this field mapping. Really, the required fields that Zoom needs is event title, event start date, which in Splash's field that includes start time as well, and then the event time zone. Duration could be mapped potentially if you had a lot of webinars that differed in duration. In this case, we've defaulted the duration to 60 minutes, and that is set on the Zapier side, and we'll take a look at that in a minute as well.
Cool. So next up, create the event in Splash. This will send Zapier your webinar details, and then that catch hook is going to grab it.
Exactly correct. So this is kind of the last step in setting up the initial integration. Zapier requires you to just send over test data to make sure everything works. So you can see in this case, I did a pretty simple webinar, and we just sent all of that data to Zapier, and it caught all that information, and it reformatted that and created that event in Zoom.
Cool. And then that's when the magic really starts to happen. That's where we see the payoff. Zapier tells Zoom your event's title, date, time, and duration, and the webinar is automatically created.
Exactly. What you see on the left side here is just our mapping screen within Zapier. So if you remembered, we mapped over three fields, right? Title, start date, and time zone. You could see how those are mapped. Topic in Zoom terminology is essentially just the title of the webinar. The when is the start date and time. The time zone is mapped. And like we mentioned, the duration was defaulted to 60 minutes. And on the right side, you see just our kind of success metric or our success message from the Zoom side saying, hey, everything is mapped correctly. This looks good. This can now be turned on and used as much as you need.
I've been using Zapier for years. That success message never gets old. Final step. What happens here, Faisal?
Yep. So like we mentioned earlier, there's really two components to this integration, right? The final step is essentially building roughly the same flow we just built for the registration sync. So luckily, Zapier gives you the ability to easily dupe a zap or dupe an integration. You could duplicate it and then simply change the action that you see on the bottom there, that screenshot. Instead of create a webinar, we're now going to update that to create a registrant.
Wonderful. So that's actually going to wrap up webinar integrations. Thank you, Faisal. Three great options there. Let's get into a Q&A. You have all done a phenomenal job of asking some great questions when you registered for this event. We picked out some of the best ones here for us to take a look at. So Barry asked, how are webinar themes different than your other event themes, which we love, by the way? Thank you, Barry. So we covered this a bit in our demo, but thanks for the opportunity to sum this up. The big thing is the default content blocks that come on a webinar theme. So that's your simple video for your YouTube Live or Vimeo streams. It's the iframe element that would allow you to broadcast LinkedIn Live or Facebook Live or all types of other media. It's the easy blocks for embedding your post-event video content. It's your optimized email sequence for reminders and post-event. It's the default copy you'll find on all the touch points. It's those optimized speaker blocks with the bios that pop out. And of course, one of my favorites, the resources block for post-event content download. So that thing is loaded. Okay, Anjali asks, what are best practices for checking in guests during a webinar or virtual event? Is it possible? And Faisal, something you showed us today is you could automate a lot of that if you're using an integration, right?
Yeah, that's always going to be kind of my first recommendation is automate as much as possible. Do this via one of the integrations that automates check-in, if that is an option for you.
Yeah, and then if you don't have the benefit of having an integration set up, that's fine. My recommendation, I've done this many a time, is treat it like you would any event. Have your check-in staff available, have the Splash host app up, and check in people as they come in, or download the attendee report afterwards and check those folks in. It's a bit of a manual step, but it's not a difficult one, and it's well worth your effort because you'll have the record of who was there. Samantha asks, I want a user-friendly platform that even the host does not need too much training in, something that is easy to use, simple, and effective. Yeah, that is one of my best recommendations, is make the host feel really comfortable. So if you have a meeting platform that you're currently using, call it Zoom or BlueJeans or GoToMeeting, they have webinar platforms that are very similar in user interface to their meeting software. So that's a great way of getting started quickly and making the host feel really comfortable, which is paramount. So those would be my recommendations there, going with something that's very similar to what you're currently using.
Yeah, and maybe Samantha, one thing to add here from the Splash side is we're actually in the process of creating quite a bit of content, right? How-to videos to set up everything that I went over today, from Zoom to BlueJeans, etc. So a lot of this content for the host will be coming out with an end goal of making you feel real comfortable and real well-versed in the tool.
Yeah, I love that, Faisal. Content is king. Okay, here's one that lots of people ask. This is arguably the most popular question. What are strategies hosts can use to foster more engagement and live interaction for virtual events? So I have a few here. I'll rattle these off. Big one for me, Q&A made available for everyone. So whether that's through a widget or through chat, but I love having a moderator on that could view all those questions and even stop the host and make sure the virtual audience is engaged. I love making the webinar console interactive. On24 is awesome for this. Lots of polls, lots of pulse checks, hand raises, surveys, quizzes. You can do all those things. Another big frontier, use innovative media. There's an app called Kahoot. We use this in our internal meetings where you can have quiz games through your mobile phone for all participants. And there's lots of other media you can embed into your splash page. One you'll be hearing about is called Icebreaker, which fosters face-to-face conversations in the virtual environment. You can embed chat and social media. If you use Zoom, I mean, the virtual backgrounds thing, awesome. Encourage people to have fun with that. Zoom and BlueJeans have a breakout room feature to encourage some side conversations. I love to celebrate new participants, right? Make them welcome themselves, give a fun fact. That always goes over well. And then big one, again, post-event. Enable conversations afterwards. Direct people to content. Direct people to your community hub. And open up a Slack channel for cross-company collaboration and conversation. Do you have any examples of Splash users doing virtual events and webinars? We do, and again, that was one of the most asked questions, so I will stop this share and show you a few examples really quickly because I know everyone wants to see that. Okay, here's a great example of a webinar hub. So many of our customers are using this one now. All upcoming virtual talks here displayed in a very easy to follow way. Very visually compelling with those calls to action. These all link out to splash pages for registration. Here's another great example of a hub, Facebook leading the charge. Really interesting way of directing guests to their various virtual events. Some visually compelling ones here. Harness is crushing it with their really dynamic webinar pages here. And check out the little chat widget they embedded in the corner. Talk about fostering interaction, even pre-event. So two examples there. Here's a virtual get-together from Harness. Expedia Group, they do a ton of virtual events. Here's one international, really beautiful use of the event page space to create that compelling digital experience. Trilogy Education Services, they crush it. Look how awesome this page is with their countdown and easily displaying their Zoom information right on the bottom there. Booking.com, another company on the vanguard of virtual events, again, showing their meeting information front and center. Pluralsight, beautiful use right here for their virtual event. And then here's the one I referenced earlier. Patreon made their live stream a destination, and you could see all the content they surrounded what was once a live stream embed and what's now acting as on-demand content. One more, Fitch Ratings, on-demand, really important. You could see everyone stressing that. And here's one of my favorite examples of post-event content right here. Okay. Gary says, it sounds like the Blue Jeans integration would help us a lot, but I don't have a technical resource on my team. What do your other customers do? So two things here. One, Blue Jeans is one of the easier integrations to set up. It's not super technical, but if you need help, Faisal, we have people for that, right?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of multifold. So like I just mentioned earlier, first of all, help center content and how-to videos are coming your way. They'll definitely make you feel comfortable. But we also have a fully ramped technical implementation team. And this is kind of the crux of their job, helping get these integrations set up and empowering you to manage that on your own. So if you'd like to lean on them, you would just kind of reach out to your customer success manager and they'd be more than happy to set something up there.
Beautiful. Taylor asked, as I'm taking time to evaluate webinar platforms, what are the pros and cons of using our meeting tech, they use Zoom, to host webinars in the meantime? So I'd say the pro is it's super easy and the presenters are going to be very comfortable because it's something you're using every day. So that's great, right? That's probably, to some, the most important thing is making the host feel good and making it an easy registration experience. The con would be if you're just using a regular meeting tech and not a webinar platform, you're probably not going to get as good of analytics, and you're not going to have the upside of being able to integrate, which is what we were speaking about earlier. And you probably won't have all of the cool interactive tools that come with a webinar platform as opposed to a meeting platform. Georgia asked, is there a way to have the location as the webinar link? Yeah, we covered this earlier, Georgia, but worth stressing again. Pop your webinar URL into your event location, and then pop it again into your calendar attachment description, because that really is going to produce a beautiful calendar invite. Jack asks, how do you ensure the presenter that is remote has the proper video set up to maintain presentation quality? We actually tackled this one. Mike from our team, who's our multimedia director, set these simple boxes up for all of our presenters and shipped them to our remote offices. So what this is just a Yeti microphone, under $100 on Amazon, a Logitech webcam, which gets a really crisp looking view, and a simple way to have an LED light up top. And we put it on a box just so it's like a platform for everything to sit on. This is a really inexpensive way to create a very professional experience. Michaela asked, what's the biggest mistake you've made hosting a hybrid event? I used to host our biggest hybrid event at Splash, which is our team scrum or town hall event. And it was hybrid. And the biggest mistake, and I made this one a bunch, is not having the host or the presenters repeat questions into the microphone for the virtual audience. That's a really big thing to make everybody could follow along. And Faisal, one last question here. Kiana asks it, is there a way to connect Splash and go to webinar? And what would be the benefit of doing so?
Yeah, so again, kind of a multifold question there, but I would kind of pitch that back to you. Do you have a marketing automation system that potentially already has a GoToWebinar connection. Think Marketo, Pardot. If so, those all have native integrations with Splash, and that's what I would encourage you to do. On the flip side, GoToWebinar is also an app in the Zapier App Store. So you could just connect via Zapier, how we talk, the same flow as Zoom. And then the benefits, automation, right? Less manual steps in terms of having to create a webinar, having to sync registrations, less management of attendees across 2 different platforms. So yeah, automation is always going to be a major benefit there.
Cool. Thanks, Faisal. And that'll do it for today. For more programming like what you saw, visit us at splashthat.com/webinars. We have new content, especially addressing virtual, coming out every week. Life is a series of flows and goodbyes. I'm afraid for now, this is goodbye. For Faisal Mawani, this is Napolitano saying mahalo.
Take care.